Our next guest is Kirsty Burrows, the head of the International Olympic Committee's Safe Sport Unit, which is responsible for overseeing the International Olympic Committee's commitment, strategy, and approach to the prevention of harassment and abuse in sport, and the protection and promotion of athlete mental health across the Olympic movement. Kirsty is the IOC Lead Safeguarding Officer at Games Time and the Academic Director of the IOC Certificate Safeguarding Officer in Sport. She is also a member of the Council of Europe's Pool of Experts in Safe Sport and author of the IOC Safeguarding Toolkit 2017. I'm your host, Lorraine Moalosi. Join me as I talk to Kirsty Burrows about the true meaning of safe sport, safeguarding, and mental health in sport. Kirsty, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Lorraine.
Before we begin, I like to start off our sessions with an icebreaker. Are you ready for that?
Of course.
What's your favorite quote, expression, or motto, and why is it your favorite?
I'd have to say it's a motto because it's something that's very close to my heart. It's something that my family has always said, which is never forget your roots and your wings. It's about trying to always stay grounded in yourself and who you are and the people close to you with your support network, but also recognizing that you need to be able to also find the courage and the strength to fly. Always knowing where home is, but finding the strength and the courage to fly, to embrace new experiences, to embrace opportunities, and to really push yourself at every opportunity. So it's really having the balance of your roots and your wings.
It's my first time hearing the part about the wings, and I absolutely love it because sometimes it feels like when people say don't forget your roots, it's very like ominous, like don't forget who you are, don't forget who you come from. But adding that wings part allows people to sort of grow and reach for the stars.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what's really important is that people evolve throughout their lifetime and through their experiences. And especially working in the fields that I do, it's really important to have the opportunity to speak to as many people as possible, to learn from different cultures, from different contexts. And that wings part is really, really essential. I think that we should always speak, always engage, always discuss. And so I think that that's really, really important, but also for your own well-being, also always rooting yourself also in home and your support network is really important. So I think that balance is really, really essential. And it's something that I really, really love. It's our family motto that we've always say to each other, especially when you're going a bit too far in one direction.
Totally agree. I'm on board with that one. And one thing that is very clear from the first time we had a conversation, Kirsty, is that you are passionate about what you do. You're passionate about safeguarding and mental health in sports. And when we were speaking, you made the distinction between safeguarding as a sort of abstract concept that people talk about and actually something that people ingrain in their culture, in the DNA of sport, and in the DNA of the various organizations they might be working for. But I'm curious, where did this passion come from?
Honestly, a whole host of various life experiences. But I think critically, I was a physiotherapist. I trained as a physiotherapist, and I had the great privilege to be able to work in Singapore, in Qatar, in Italy, all across the world, working in elite sport. And when you're a physiotherapist, you really have an amazing opportunity. I mean, I think what we find very often is that within the athletic environment, the connection that athletes have with their physio is often quite unique. It's really a therapeutic relationship where you're seeing each other very often, a lot of the time, and there's not necessarily, for example, a pre-consideration that you have to speak about your mental health or your well-being or anything like that, but just due to the dynamic that normally gets formed within that therapeutic relationship, you often find that athletes start to, if they feel comfortable with you, start to talk to you about their own experiences. Now, whether their experiences inside of sport or outside of sport. And what I realized and what was very clear to me is that, both of the topics that I oversee in terms of, and that we're working in the IOC Safe Sport Unit, they're both endemic societal issues, so around mental health and well-being, but also around interpersonal violence. And we see similar levels inside sport and outside sport. And what I saw was that there was a huge need to address the prevention of and response to interpersonal violence in the context of sport, and to promote athlete well-being and holistic approaches to athlete well-being inside of sport as well. But also that considering these are endemic societal issues, and considering that sport has a unique platform to go across multiple boundaries, religious boundaries, geopolitical boundaries, sport is a unifying force. There is also a huge potential that through sport, we can also help to tackle some of these endemic societal issues. So it was really about, seeing the need to further address the manifestations of interpersonal violence and the manifestations of mental health symptoms and disorders in the context of sport for athletes and all participants. And then also, how can we have a broader impact through sport, basically as part of public health? Nobody should suffer from interpersonal violence. And mental health symptoms and disorders are so endemic. They're recognized as having the highest disease burden for states. It's really, really important. They're both fundamental societal issues. So what can we do in sport and what can we do through sport? That's where it all came from.
Was sport always something you were drawn to, or where did that part come from, even when you were a physiotherapist?
So growing up, I was a ballet dancer. Absolutely love ballet. And I got injured and I went to go to the English National Ballet, and they had this whole physiotherapy wing. And I considered that if I couldn't dance, then I would love to be around the dancers. And that's where my idea to become a physiotherapist was. So it was really, no, ballet is not an Olympic sport, but it was really from the sporting aspect. And so that's when I then decided to follow a pathway for physiotherapy. And then from there, as I mentioned, it was really recognizing the manifestations of these two critical topics in sport and through sport. I had the opportunity to travel with the teams all over the world, and really saw firsthand so much the power of sport to break down so many boundaries. And so then thought, I really want to see, sport has given so much to my life. Physical fitness and well-being has given so much to my life. And I see through also contacts and people around me just how endemic, especially things like interpersonal violence, are in society. So it was really about, so then I did a master's degree, and then started working with the IOC. And then I'm also now doing my PhD as well. So it's been a long journey, but one that actually, whilst it's not a set out journey from the very beginning, it's not a common pathway to follow, all of these experiences culminated in having a unique insight into both athlete well-being and the immense power for sport for social good.
And from your wealth of experience, what would you say the difference between safeguarding as a conceptual thing that we all talk about and agree is important just on a surface level, and actually safeguarding in practice? What is the difference?
It's a really good question. And it's really, for me, it's the difference between seeing something as a tick boxing exercise vis-a-vis having something which is really where the culture of safeguarding is ingrained within the environment. And a culture of safeguarding, there's a lot of misperceptions on the culture of safeguarding, right? It is not supposed to be something that is restrictive. It is not supposed to be something where people are looking over you all the time. And it's really, the culture of safeguarding is effectively how we can help everybody to thrive within their environment. They should feel physically and psychologically safe. And we know that this culture of safeguarding, so just a policy or a tick box exercise, that's not a culture of safeguarding. It's really ensuring that people know that they matter, that their experiences matter, that they feel they can speak up, that they feel they can challenge if they have concerns, that they feel they will be listened to. It's really about fostering that psychological safety. And we know that, for example, within sport, there's been a consideration, because unfortunately we also see different forms of interpersonal violence can become quite normalized within the sporting context. So things like hazing are recognized as a form of interpersonal violence, but we see that sometimes these are part of team initiations, and it's like, no, but this is just a normal process to go through. And so what's really, really important is what we're seeing more and more of is evidence which shows that actually a physically and psychologically safe athletic environment, an athletic environment which respects athletes as people first, which has caring determination as key features of the environment, and has respect as a key ethos, these are synonymous with high performance environments. These are the environments in which athletes can thrive. So what we are really trying to shift is away from winning at all costs towards winning well. And what that means is it's not just a series of, like policies and checkboxes. They are important. It's important, for example, to make sure that, when people are working with the teams, especially with vulnerable people, that you go through all of the checks in terms of criminal records checks, reference checks. The basic measures should always be implemented to reduce the risk of any harm. Yes, but that in itself is not just that's only one part of creating a safe sporting culture. So it's really about recognizing that, almost dismantling it as this sort of scary faraway concept, or this thing which is the series of bureaucratic tasks that you have to do, or organizational tasks, and really looking at, no, it's about fostering an environment where everybody can thrive, and recognizing that safe sporting environments, moving from winning at all costs to winning well, this is an environment which is synonymous with high performance sport, and that all participants have the right to.
And speaking of winning, it takes a lot for a person to become an Olympic level athlete. And in business context, we often sort of cite athletes as the very pinnacle of success, and how one can sort of work with their mind to achieve sort of the highest level of success. So we take it for granted that this is something that they do and that they're just good at. But what repercussions come with performing at such a level? And is it easy maybe to miss mental health issues in athletes because of how much their mental resilience is admired, and overall how much mental resilience is demanded in order to become an athlete at that level?
Yeah, I think there is an important distinction to make, because we know that also, for example, sports has many mental health benefits, protective elements, etc. When athletes, especially athletes, as you mentioned, when they're often seen as role models, as gods, as people that are really like their abilities there. And it's really recognizing that athletes are also people too. And that what we see is that sort of the prevalence of mental health symptoms and disorders within elite athlete populations is similar to the general population. So around 1 in 3, with some specific types of symptoms and disorders, it's higher, and in others it's lower. We need to destigmatize mental health. We need to recognize that athletes are people first. And that what's really important is also our mental health strategy is all about recognizing, not just focusing on, okay, the recognition of mental health symptoms and disorders is critical and crucial, as is access to care, access to specialized care. All of this is critical and crucial. Emergency mental health action plans, these are important. But there's a whole spectrum of mental health. Mental health is not just about the lack of a mental health symptom or disorder, right? Just like physical health isn't just about not being sick. So what we need to recognize is really focus on the entire spectrum. So look at mental resilience, look at mental well-being, look at mindfulness, really support mental health literacy within the athlete population. Now, supporting mental health literacy, effectively saying athletes are people too, destigmatizing conversations around mental health, supporting mental health help seeking, mental health check-ins, just building mental health literacy is critical and important for athletes. It's critical and important for everybody. So I think there's really what we need to do is exactly as you say, there is an idea sometimes that athletes are put in the pinnacle. This is not the stress and the pressure that can put on them can further reduce the feeling that they can seek help. It further stigmatizes topics around conversation. So what we try and always say is promoting holistic approaches to athlete welfare. Athletes are people first. And if we take care of both the athletic and the non-athletic identity, if we look at holistic approaches to athlete well-being, we also see that throughout their entire career, including the career transition, you often it has a positive benefit for their entire experience within the context of sport. And again, that's about thriving through sport. So really, really focusing on recognizing that need for holistic approaches to athlete well-being.
I think that people forget that athletes are people first. Because especially online, if you dare to read the comments, if maybe a team or somebody loses and they don't do as expected, there could be a lot of backlash and a lot of vile things that really cross that line. Is that me just being like super sensitive and being like it's a problem, or do you actually agree with that statement of like sometimes we forget that what we're looking at on TV, that's a person, it's a person with feelings and emotions, and they're not just a machine?
Oh, it's a huge problem. I think that, yeah, the fact that not recognizing that athletes are people is a huge problem. Athletes are very highly exposed to online violence, as are journalists, as are others who are in the public sphere. You often see higher rates of exposure to online violence. And also, just in general, I think that there is a misconception that people can act with impunity online, that effectively you can say whatever you want, that there's this broad, you can say absolutely whatever you want, there's never any repercussions, and that actually it's not as harmful as if you say it to someone's face, as you say it to an individual person, or if you commit real world harm, that it's not as harmful. And actually, this is completely debunked. I think that we do see high rates of online violence towards athletes. And we recognize actually that the harm that it causes is real embodied harm. And it's really important to support and protect athletes when it comes to online violence. And also to recognize that you can't just act with impunity, and that there should be real world follow-up to online harm. So that's why, for example, for Paris, we're covering all Olympians competing in Paris 2024, as well as entourage officials, and also the entourage officials and Paralympians competing at the Paralympic Games Paris 2024 are all able to be covered by a service which will utilize AI to detect and respond at real time to any online violence that's targeted towards the athletes, entourage, and officials. And then real world action will be taken based on that. So it's fully integrated with our safeguarding systems there at the Games. We also will have the potential to expedite it to the platform. So any abuse that breaches the community guidelines or is potentially criminal in nature will be eligible for follow-up action in order to ensure a safe digital environment. And that's really about, part of our recognizing that this is a challenge for athletes and that they are people first, and that we need to ensure that the same device that they're using to message their parents and friends to talk about their experience in the village or how they did or things like that, the same device they might be using for help seeking if they wanted to check in with we have a mentally fit helpline, for example, that's available. That same device should also not be a vector for being abused at any time of the day or night from 10,000 miles away. So this is a huge challenge, and it's something that we're always seeking for pragmatic initiatives that can really help to support athletes with these challenges.
Incredible. Can you tell us a bit more actually about the IOC Safe Sport Unit and some of the key areas that you're focusing on to ensure that you're really safeguarding the athletes?
I can, although I might be here for a while, because we're doing a lot of, this is really a strategic priority of the IOC and our Olympic Agenda 2020+5. It's also focus area 1 of our AI agenda as well. So it's really, we're doing a huge amount of work, both in terms of the work that we do at the Games time. So at the Games time, we have our framework in place. We're going to have an army of welfare officers, over 165 athlete welfare officers from over 90 countries there. We're going to be doing a community of practice activities with them. We have a mind zone there, and that's where the Safe Sport unit, so me and my team will be in the mind zone, staffing the mind zone. And that mind zone is a space dedicated to disconnection and decompression. It's going to have bespoke VR guided mindfulness activity, breathing exercises. Athletes will be able to go there and do art. We've developed this in collaboration with Powerade, so really focusing on this kind of taking a break, disconnect. We have a mentally fit helpline, which provides support to athletes in over 70 different languages, not just during the Games, but for 4 years after the Games. So these are just some of the initiatives that we have for the Games themselves. Outside of that, we do a lot of work in supporting Olympic movement organizations, so especially IF, international federations and national Olympic committees, to strengthen their safeguarding measures, to implement policies, educational programs, to really to build capacity and strengthen safeguarding across the entire Olympic movement. That's a fundamental area of importance, working closely with Olympic Solidarity. So really looking at programs, forums, initiatives, developing tools, toolkits to help sports organizations strengthen their safeguarding work. We also push strongly on the research. We recognize that the IOC, we have this possibility to, if we develop guidelines and initiatives, if we really have to make sure that what we say does have an impact and really can have the end effect of making the environment safer for everyone. So we have a lot of research grants. We conduct research ourselves. So we do a lot around that. We're just about to publish our third consensus statement on interpersonal violence in the context of sport. And then one thing that I'm really excited about, which is above what anything. So normally all of the work that we do, it's really focused on supporting safeguarding at the games, ensuring that the Olympic Games, that they are a safe environment where everyone can thrive, and supporting the building capacity and safeguarding across Olympic movement organizations. But last year, in recognition, we heard more and more from organizations that they were still having critical challenges when it came to the response to safeguarding cases, mostly at the national level. And this is really, really an important distinction to make, because whenever somebody is harmed by interpersonal violence, it's really important that they have access to systems, service, recourse, remedy where the harm occurs. They have access to somebody who understands their culture, their context, speaks their language, that they have access to trauma-informed systems, that it's really important about recognizing that these topics are ones that are highly complex and need localized approaches and individualized approaches. No one survivor of harassment and abuse is the same, right? So no, you can't say victims and survivors are one homogenous group. So it's really important to have individualized approaches or country-specific approaches and pathways to access services when anybody is harmed by interpersonal violence. So in recognition of this, and the international federations in particular, really calling for IOC leadership in terms of strengthening specifically response to abuse at the local level, the IOC announced a 10 million USD fund to strengthen safeguarding at the local level. And without going, because I don't want to, I know I'm talking a lot here, but what's effectively happening is we're starting off now with 2 pilot hubs. So there's going to be the establishment of 2 safe sport hubs, one in Southern Africa and one in the Pacific Islands. And those hubs will be a collaborative effort between sports, intergovernmental organizations, and civil society. And those hubs will be specifically for anyone harmed by interpersonal violence. And their aim will be to help facilitate access to help, care, and support. And it's really going to be focusing on sort of really strengthening collaboration between sporting and non-sporting safeguarding ecosystems. So these are 2 pilot hubs, the Southern Africa and the Pacific Islands, both of those regions, because there's fantastic work underway already where sports, intergovernmental organizations, and civil society are working together. And if these hubs are showing an impact and really helping people in the context of sport, the intention is to then have those hubs across the Olympic movement and an independent governance mechanism overseeing them.
I'm from Southern Africa, so I'm glad to hear that there's incredible work already underway. But I guess what I'm hearing as well is that there's a lot of interdependency, in the sense that you really are dependent on the national sort of level for them to sort of enforce the safeguarding and make sure that all the guidelines or the policies that you have in place are enforced. But at the same time, they might be very dependent on you as well for funding, for sort of communicating those guidelines, which might pose some challenges. So I wonder what challenges you have faced so far in trying to safeguard when you're such a huge brand with so many sort of touch points across the world, working in different contexts and different languages, etc. What challenges has that sort of setup posed?
I think a couple. So it's this recognizing the need for localized approaches is critical, right? This is really, really critical. Oftentimes there's a misconception also in terms of the way that sport is governed and the governance framework. So you have the IOC, and then you have NOCs who are their own independent organizations, international federations, which are their own, and then they have their national federations. So I think there's a lot of misconception in that in terms of how much power you actually have as the IOC, especially when it comes to case response that has happened outside of an Olympic Games or Youth Olympic Games environment. And if you overlay that with the fact that the interpersonal violence, whenever especially a crime has been committed, it's also a state issue, right? There needs to also be link in with the legal systems and infrastructure. And you're working across now hundreds and hundreds of different jurisdictions with different languages, cultures, etc., with different services, different levels of, massive differences in the criminal justice systems, etc., etc. I think what is really critical then is really to say, okay, we need to work at each on a country by country level and help to strengthen also the collaboration between sport organizations what we say is between sporting and non-sporting safeguarding ecosystems. This is critically important because when somebody has suffered from interpersonal violence, they should have access to a multitude of different services and support. They should have access to recourse and remedy, both through the sporting resolution, through the sporting pathway, for example, but also potentially, if a crime has occurred, through the state systems. Now, there needs to be a strength in coordination, I think, is really, really important. But doing that at an international level is not possible to be able to do that. And I think also, finally, it's about the scale of the problem. So, for example, you mentioned, as I'm a member of the Council of Europe's pool of European experts. In Europe, 1 in 5 children are the victims of sexual violence. 1 in 5. The numbers are huge. Around the world, we see around 1 in 3 women are the victims of physical or sexual, intimate partner or other violence. The studies for men, there's a lower, it's harder to find the prevalence rates, but some studies show around 1 in 6. We see huge. Interpersonal violence is endemic. It is an absolutely mess. Now, so the other challenge is really to recognize, okay, what are the best systems, services, and infrastructure to make sure that you build trust in the system, that you prevent abuse from happening in the first place. But when abuse occurs, that people know where they can go, who they can go to, they have trust in the system, they trust in the service, and that they're able to access all of the systems and services that they need. Now, in that sense, as I mentioned, the stats that I just mentioned are global societal stats, right? So sport is not alone in this. We exist, it's a microcosm of society. We exist within the fabric of broader society. We depend, if somebody is harmed in the context of sport, but it is a criminal level harm, it also must go through the criminal justice system, right? In the same way. So what we need to really recognize is recognizing all of these factors. The most important thing is to see, okay, how can we build systems at the national level that can help to both prevent and respond to interpersonal violence, both in the context of sport, but also help the broader conversation about the fact that this is an endemic societal issue and that we need to see strengthened efforts and approaches to address and protect everyone from harm and from violence, no matter what environment it occurs in.
I've just started thinking, because you've mentioned it a few times, how endemic interpersonal violence is, and I guess we don't really stop and think about these statistics. And like you said, sports doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists within sort of a society, and these issues are societal issues that then become sports issues. And so for me, just hearing the 3 statistics that you just said, that's already very heavy. So you working in safeguarding, I'm sure that you're confronted with some harrowing situations. I wonder how you make sure to sort of protect your own mental health, especially when you're exposed to these things that maybe, because the thing that I was feeling when you were speaking, I was like, it feels like human beings are very good at just hurting each other and just being violent against each other. And that hurts my soul. So I wonder how you manage to sort of stay true to your mission and to the work that you do without letting it affect you too much.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that I want to say there, so I'm going to try and jot down so I don't forget it. The first thing I want to say, the reason why I want to make sure that it doesn't come across as a cop-out, when we say that this is an endemic societal issue, it's not trying to say, okay, so it's not sport's fault that also abuse happens in the context of sport because it's an endemic societal issue. It's really important to make that distinction. No, there is, we can also see that there are some areas of where sport has a responsibility to, in our system, make sure that we implement measures to both prevent and respond to abuse. We exist in the broader society. These are public health endemic, as we've mentioned it many times. That doesn't mean we don't recognize, and we're not just saying, okay, well, it's a big issue everywhere. So, what we see, and that's why we're really proud of the work that we're doing, is, but in sport, we can actually say, okay, no, wait, we're going to implement these measures. We're going to reduce the risk here. And we see how we can collaborate with other organizations, with other systems and services to improve response. So I want to make that clear, because sometimes people say, you're just saying this as though to say, it's not. But I think it's both important distinctions to make. Yes, it's endemic across society, but yes, there's something in sport that we can do, and that it's a huge for the IOC, like a strategic, like very important focus point is really, okay, to see how we can address this. And that's why I love my job. I love the support that we have to really drive this forward. So, and then on your other part, yeah, it is tough. Working in safeguarding is often quite a challenging thing. And we're building a community of practice of safeguarding officers. So we have the IOC Certificate, Safeguarding Officer in Sport. It's a 7-month-long certificate with 3 exams. It's a hefty undertaking, but this is an important job with a lot of responsibility. We now have over 250 trained safeguarding officers from 84 countries within the first 3 years of this course. We're taking in our next cohort now, and the 4th cohort will start in September. That community of practice is really important, because not only does that mean we have safeguarding officers now across the world all working together and building safeguarding systems, structures, knowledge, awareness across the world, but it also means we create this community of practice that can support each other, because it is difficult. And finally, what I want to say is that also the majority of people are good, and we know that. And within sport, we see, and I get the chance to work with the majority of amazing people. You know, there have been studies done about like the fact that people that commit abuse and violence and why in broader society, why it takes a while for them to be discovered. And there are many challenges in terms of identifying somebody who is committing abuse and things like that. There's grooming of individuals, of systems, of everything, right? But what we know is that the majority of people are good. So the majority of people we are working with are safe sport allies. They are people who would actually, most people are horrified when you hear the stats about interpersonal violence, because you don't exist with this idea to commit violence. So you would never imagine that there are people who are committing that violence. It's kind of like, it's really abhorrent to even hear the stats. And I recognize that. But that gives me a lot of comfort as well, because it means the majority of people are good. So we have many more allies than we have people that want to commit harm. What's important is being intentional about being intentional about safeguarding, not just being like, sport is good, people are good, everything's good, so we don't have to worry. No, we have to be intentional about empowering allies, making sure that everybody knows these are the small steps that we can take to reduce the risk of harm occurring in this environment. Because just because we want to believe that just because the majority of people are good doesn't mean that we don't have to be conscious about implementing measures to restrict the harm that those who would like to commit harm can do. Does that make sense? And I think that's really important. It's really important for us, is like, sometimes otherwise you can really get dragged down by it. But I'm surrounded by so many incredible allies, and we're all pushing in the same direction. And that's also what gives me personally strength. But yeah, working in safeguarding is quite challenging for many reasons. But this community of practice and working together and making sure that you really surround yourselves with like-minded people is essential. And looking after your own well-being, hard to do, but definitely something that I try and instill in my day-to-day life as well.
I think that was an excellent reminder that people are good. Like, they're more good people than bad people, because those numbers are just harrowing, and you can get lost in, especially when you mention children, when you mention women, and you mention, it can be very just daunting emotionally and just heavy, right? So it's wonderful that you speak that encouragement and also remind us of the power of sports, because that's why we love it, and that's why sports has sort of transcended generations and generations, because there is something unifying about sports. There is something that goes beyond who you are and your personal identity to us as a group, right? Mm-hmm. But with that said, are there any safeguarding misconceptions that you think are very important to dispel?
Oh, lots. And I think but I think the one that I find, there are lots, and it's really important. Breaking some of those misconceptions is really critical to what we do. But I will say one that I think is something which is specifically in the context of sport. So specifically in the context of sport, one of the main misconceptions is that often the term is utilized gender-based violence and violence against women and girls. So effectively, like, as though they're the same thing, right? When they are not, they're two distinct things. And the reason why it's really important for this in the context of sport is, as such, we know that in broad society, women and girls are disproportionately affected by interpersonal violence. We know that. It's been very well and clearly shown. In the context of sport, actually, Some studies have also shown high rates or similar rates or higher rates of violence against against men and boys. Now, we don't have enough data. It's extremely challenging to have, the prevalence data on these very sensitive topics are very difficult. But what we do see is that it's really important within the context of sport to be very careful how we gender the topic. That's why we use the term interpersonal violence, because this is the same also for mental health. If you consider that, for example, I watched a documentary once where a male sufferer of bulimia said that, the person who came in said, "Oh, I'm here to talk about bulimia, but you're all men, so, don't think this is going to be a problem for you." By what we do actually by having assumptions around who could be a victim of, for example, interpersonal violence, or who could be suffering from a specific type of mental health symptom and disorder, it further stigmatizes, it creates vulnerabilities, it effectively, it further silences people. So I think one of the big misconceptions that I want to dispel, one of the things that I want to say is that we recognize that you need to have targeted interventions for more vulnerable groups. That is very true. We recognize that, for example, across society, women and girls are disproportionately affected by interpersonal violence. That's also true. But in the context of sport, we want to have a universal design approach where, yes, you can have targeted interventions for more vulnerable groups, but we need to protect everybody within the environment. And it's really important that the work that we do recognizes and doesn't further silence, for example, male victims of violence, because we see there are, male victimization, it further silences them and stigmatizes them. And that is something that we do not want to happen. So it's really, really important to be very careful about the terminology we use and about assumptions about, oh, this sport has more violence, or this gender has more violence, or this group experiences less violence, or it's the coaches that are committing all the abuse, or things like that. All of this is very unhelpful, and it's also not backed up in a lot of the data. So it's really, for the approach is to say anyone, unfortunately, anywhere, in any setting, can be a victim of violence, and anyone can be a perpetrator. We need to dispel those things so that we can appropriately look at how we address it. Otherwise, we create new vulnerabilities effectively in other groups.
Absolutely. It's like tipping the scales to the other side when actually you want to have that balance of everyone feels safe, everyone has access to what they need for mental health, for physical safety, psychological, all of that.
Yeah. Everybody has a right to safety. Everyone has a right to, and to experience a sporting environment. And to what we really want to see is that, to experience all the positive benefits that sport has. It's a phenomenal thing, and that everybody has the right to experience all the broad benefits of sport participation. But that can only happen if the environment that you're in is one that is physically and psychologically safe. And that's the fundamental ethos of the work that we do.
Wonderful. Incredible. At the beginning of the podcast, you mentioned that you're doing your PhD, and you're someone that's really, really knowledgeable in this area of safeguarding, and you are the academic director for the IOC Certificate that you mentioned, the Safeguarding Officer in Sport, and also the Council of, I can't remember what the title was, the
Council of Europe Pro Safe Sport Plus. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, you do so many things, Kirsty, in this area. Yet you are still pursuing sort of learning. And I've often heard it said that the best teachers are the best learners as well. And I feel like that's so true for you. But maybe say it in your own words so that I'm not sort of painting a false picture of who you are. But I feel like you're a great teacher because you're an incredible learner. Why is it important for you to keep on learning and keep on pushing in this area?
It's a good question. I feel like a moral responsibility as well, because I really feel like I have the real honor to do the work that I do, to work at the IOC, where we also can have so much impact across the world. And that means a lot of people that we can positively impact. Now, for me, it's really important to then make sure that our work is evidence-based. But we're also working within topics where the evidence base for these topics is quite, and especially in the global South, is there's a paucity of research and understanding and evidence. And so it's really about, I feel a responsibility to ensure that the work that we do really has that evidence informed. Now, where we are seeing a clear lack or a clear need to further delve into it, then I see that I need to continue to learn. I need to really continue to explore. I need to continue to follow the evidence myself, to conduct the research myself. That's why also we sit in the medical and scientific department. And it's also part of taking a public health approach, right? To take a public health approach, you first need to be able to define the challenge. Then you need to really look at the prevalence of what it is that you're looking at, the prevalence rates, and then look at how you can address it, how you can ameliorate the risk of it, and then how you can scale that. Now, there's still so much of a gap in the knowledge around this amazing work that's been done. I should really do a shout out to all the amazing researchers that are working in this field. We're so grateful to you, the ones that are working in safeguarding and in mental health and athlete well-being. But still, there's more that we need to see. So for me, it was really important to supplement my work with doing my PhD to keep me always learning, always seeking information, always seeking how to address this. And I'm very grateful for my PhD supervisors who keep me on track. Now, my PhD is looking at really the establishment of the regional hubs that we're having. It's for me, not just for me, for the whole working group, it was critically important that these hubs are not seen as something where the IOC is coming into Southern Africa and saying, okay, there's going to be a hub here and it's going to do this and it's going to do this and it's going to operate like this and this is how it will work and this is how it will engage with victims and survivors in the process of its establishment and everything else. Because we don't know what systems, services, infrastructure, we don't know the best approach for the region. It needs to be by the region, for the region. It needs buy-in from the region. It needs a different approach. Engaging with victims and survivors in the development of initiatives around safeguarding is essential. But how you engage with victims and survivors in Switzerland might be very different to how you engage with victims and survivors in different areas of the world. Everything needs to be considered right from the very local perspective, really building the recognizing and building on the local expertise and knowledge base. We can't come in with a pre-baked idea of this is what the region needs, and we need to do that in a very different way. So this is what my PhD is really focusing on, how we ensure that is embedded throughout the Safe Sport Regional Hub initiative, because at the end of the day, our prime concern is impact. We want this to help. We want this to help people. We want this to support people in sport. We want people's experiences in sport to be safe and enjoyable. And we want to ensure these systems are in place. And so it's really about trying to make sure that we do this in a way that can have the most impact. And that means by the region, for the region, addressing the regional needs, addressing the needs of people in the region. And that's essential.
And if anyone listening today is inspired by the stuff that you've said and really wants to play their own part in safeguarding athletes and everyone, because initially I was going to ask specifically about mine as women para-athletes, but I think it's so crucial what you said, that we want to safeguard everyone so that we make sure that everyone is safe instead of creating these imbalances or creating a new sort of weakness. If anyone is listening and wants to do their part, what advice would you give them?
Well, if you're already within the sport ecosystem, I would say that I think every single person in the sport ecosystem has a role to play. So I think that's really, if you're already within the sporting ecosystem, you don't have to be the safeguarding officer to have a role in safeguarding, right? And that's the whole thing about the safeguarding culture, right? Everybody has a role to play, even in the terms of their own building their own awareness or becoming a better advocate or even informing themselves more about this topic. If not, I would say really to reach out to to an organization. There's loads of different courses online. Like we have lots of free courses on Athlete 365 around safeguarding to give you more information. And if this is something that it really, really interests you, I would say would be really good to see if this was a field that you would like to work in, or a field that you would like to support in, and see how the role that you can also play. So yeah, we have lots of tools and materials that are available on Athlete 365. And then I think it would really be about reaching out to your sports organizations and understanding what their approach to safeguarding is. Of course, as I said, safeguarding is also a real position of responsibility. So it's really important. You'll have to go through checks in order to work in this space, because it's really important that people that do work in this space are also it's really important that we recognize that safeguarding officers are in a position of responsibility. But I think it's really important to be able to reach out to your local club or organization and ask them what they do, and ask them if you can support, and then make sure that you're trained and have gone through those processes to ensure that you are in a position where you could support that organization. So yeah, education, learning, and anything you need. We've got Athlete 365, and we've also got our safeguarding officer email address for the Safe Sport unit, where you can get in touch for further information.
Wonderful. And finally, Kirsty, if anyone wants to get in contact with you, what would be the best way to do so?
We have our email, which is safeguardingofficer@olympic.org, and that comes through as well to me. So that would be the best way. And also we have our Athlete 365 email as well. We've got it through there, our Athlete 365 program. So we're available on there.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much for coming on to the Sports CDP Crash Course. It has been a wonderful conversation. At first, I got really moved by those statistics, and I was about to be one of the people that lose hope and go, wow, this world is coming to an end. But through your reassurance and knowing that people like you are actively trying to ensure that everyone is safe has given me as well that confidence and helped me relax. So thank you very much for all the work that you're doing, Kirsty.
Thank you so much, Lorraine. I appreciate that. Thank you for having me.